Hey everyone, this is Mason Hutchison, and you're listening to HerbRally, your daily herbal podcast. We come out with new episodes about 5 days a week, so be sure to tune in often. Our goal for the show is to help you along your herbalist journey, no matter what stage you're at. Today's episode of the podcast is a very special one, and this is our good friend Jiling Lin in conversation with renowned herbalist Chanchal Cabrera. And in this conversation, they discuss her new book. It's called Holistic Cancer Care. In fact, I interviewed her as well and went over the book in our Herbalist Hour series. But this time, Jiling is interviewing Chanchal, and it is a wonderfully enlightening conversation. They do talk about her new book, but then they also go over a lot more great insight from Chanchal. She just always impresses me a lot. So if you'd like to learn more about Chanchal, you could go to chanchalcabrera.com, and links, as always, will be in the show notes. And of course, Jiling also is an herbalist and acupuncturist. If you'd like to learn more about her and her work, just simply go to jilinglin.com. I know you're going to love this conversation, so I really appreciate Jiling taking the time to sit down with Chanchal, and thanks to you, dear listener, for tuning in as well. Also, before we get into the show, I want to say a huge thank you to our HerbRally Schoolhouse members. If you'd like to learn more about the HerbRally Schoolhouse, simply go to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And if you'd like to try your first 30 days for free, simply use the coupon code podcast at checkout. Again, that's herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And a huge thank you to all of our members for showing your support of HerbRally. So that's going to do it for my rambling today. Now enjoy this incredibly informative and entertaining conversation with Jiling and Chanchal. Talk to you soon. Bye. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some Mullen and some Kush, my brethren. While listening to HerbRally Podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchison. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jiling, your host, acupuncturist and herbalist in Ventura, California, ancestral homelands of the Chumash people. Please enjoy today's talk with Chanchal Cabrera. Hi, Chanchal. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I would be happy to. I am joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Comox First Nation people on eastern Vancouver Island. The name Comox means land of plenty. So we are in a herbal paradise here. Unlike most of Canada, we have very mild winters. I have a year-round garden, and it is just nature all around. Very, very beautiful. But my ancestral territories is from Scotland. Despite the English accent, I did my herbal medicine school in England, and I went to high school in England. But I am actually Scottish, proudly Scottish, not English. I've been a medical herbalist since 1987 is when I graduated out of a 4-year herbal medicine program in England. At the time, it was a private college. It later became an undergraduate degree, but I was about 10 years prior to that. So I've been a medical herbalist all my working life. And in a number of different situations and settings, I've ran herbal medicine shops in Vancouver for 12 years. I had 3 shops going in Vancouver. I've done a lot of education work, running colleges and being the director of the herbal medicine department in the naturopathic school in Vancouver for 12 years. And more recently, although I'm still a clinician and I see patients, definitely see patients every week, I've also retrained as a horticulture therapist and a master gardener. And I had the incredible privilege of studying at Kew Gardens in London in summer school for 2 summers to learn about how to run a botanic garden. So I'm now the director of one of the 5 registered botanic gardens in British Columbia, and we specialize in food and medicine plants. So I'm a herbalist in the clinic, and I'm a herbalist with my hands in the dirt.
And you mentioned right now you're directing 5 different gardens.
No, I'm the director of one of 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's enough already. There's 5 registered botanic gardens in British Columbia that is registered in the International Directory that's run from Kew in London. And my property is one of the 5. It puts me in some rather exalted company, like the University of British Columbia Garden, for example. And so it's a bit of a yes, well, I don't have any gardens like that. I have a 7-acre property that's open to the public. So a botanic garden, by definition, through the International Association, is a garden that is open to the public and is predicated on education and conservation. And so that's what we do here. We teach people how to grow food, how to grow medicine, how to harvest, how to process the herbs. And then, of course, because I'm also a medical herbalist, we teach people how to use the herbs as well.
And you're the author of 2 books, right? One on fibromyalgia and the other one on holistic cancer care.
That's correct. The fibromyalgia book is actually out of print now. It was... it came out 22 years ago. And so it is now out of print, but is available through my website as a PDF download. And the new book, Holistic Cancer Care, just came out early this year.
So how does, I imagine as a little kid, you were really into plants and dirt and whatnot. And it sounds like you went into the medical herbalism realm. And then now you find yourself back in the hands in the dirt realm. How does the holistic cancer care work play into your current passions?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I definitely was a kid who was into nature. I grew up on an organic farm, and as a small child, I had a pony, and I would go off with my pony and my little satchel on my back and a flower press. And I would pick flowers, press them, and then mount them into scrapbooks and look up Latin names and write out the Latin names in my little childish handwriting. And regrettably, some years later, my mom was moving house and cleaning out, and she threw away all my scrapbooks of pressed flowers. But from 8 or 9 years old, I knew that I would be doing something with plants. And I went to herb school in England in the early 1980s, and there really was only one school. It was actually called the School of Herbal Medicine, the school. And I came out of there after 4 years and practiced in Scotland for a little while, and then ended up moving to Vancouver in British Columbia. And I practiced for about 15 years. And I would say I came out of school with core competence, like safe, probably not going to kill anybody, maybe could help them a bit. And after 5 years, I felt good at what I was doing. And that was full-time practice. That's basically all I was doing. And after 10 years, I felt skilled. And after 15 years of clinical practice, during which time I was also running some education programs and I got my shops going, I then realized that actually I was not sharp anymore. My students were finding out information that I didn't know. They were getting ahead of me. And the state of play had changed. I mean, I went through herb school when we didn't learn about Lyme's, we didn't learn about chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. Hepatitis C had not been identified. HIV got named while I was in school. So before that, it was beginning to get recognized, but didn't even have a proper name. So, 15 years in medicine is a long time. And so the state of the art and the state of the practice had changed. And a lot of herbs had come along. Like, I did not study ashwagandha or turmeric or green tea in herbal medicine school. And today, if you went to herb school, those are some of the first herbs they would teach you. But we never were taught those at all. They were not in the repertoire. So I realized after 15 years that I needed a refresh. And I took myself back to school and I did a Master of Science in Herbal Medicine at the University of Wales. So I did a proper academic master's. And it was fabulous. And I was casting around trying to figure out what to do for my dissertation. And I had the extraordinary opportunity to go to work doing research in the clinic of a herbalist in Oregon called Donnie Yance. And Donnie is the herbalist's herbalist, shall we say. He has only himself a high school education. He never went to herb school at all, or college, but he is very, very brilliant and very dedicated to the practice of herbal medicine in cancer care. And he hired me to do research in his clinic to look into long-term survivors of breast cancer that were under his care for 10 years or more and thriving. And so I did my research there for him, but it became my master's dissertation. It's called Living with Breast Cancer, because they were long-term survivors. And it gave me a whole new insight. I essentially apprenticed myself to a master after 15 years of clinical practice, because what he gave me was the understanding that herbal medicine has a lot to offer in cancer care. I had up to that point, I think like many other people, had felt sort of hopeless and helpless around that diagnosis. After all, they're having chemo and radiation. What can the herbs offer when they're in such big disease, with such big treatments? What is the space for herbal medicine to work? And Donnie completely changed that for me. He made me realize that the sicker the person is, the more they need the herbs, and the more space there is for herbs to do the work. So my practice now, I do not practice alternative medicine. My patients are not required to make a choice, either or. In fact, quite the opposite. I won't take on a cancer patient who's not under oncology care, because I believe that they need to have that level of oversight and review that I can't actually give them. The tests, the scans, and those sorts of things that I'm not able to order. So I don't practice alternative medicine. And I don't really like the term complementary, because that implies that somehow there's the doctors and we complement them, but it's not very empowering to the herbal medicine. And so for a long time, I called my work integrated medicine, because that seemed like it was a buzzword in the 90s. It seemed like a good term that we could integrate all the best themes from different strands of medicine and bring it all together. And I think that still has some value. But about 20 years ago, I was in conversation with an ethnopharmacologist from the University of Montreal, Dr. Pierre Haddad. And Pierre was telling me about his research with First Nations elders in northern Quebec. And his specialty is diabetes research, but he's an ethnopharmacologist. So he's studying plant medicines for diseases in Indigenous communities. And those people, those elders, said to him, we don't practice alternative medicine, we don't like complementary, and we don't like integrated medicine as a term, because to them, integration meant loss of cultural identity, theft of cultural knowledge, homogenization of knowledge. And that was not what they wanted to portray. And so Pierre, Dr. Haddad, asked these elders, well, okay, I understand, but what can we call it? You're doing herbal medicine for diabetes, doing blood tests and what have you. What do you call that? And their answer was that they would like their medicine to be called collaborative medicine. And that is the terminology that I have taken on for about 20 years now. So that's how I see the herbal medicine in contemporary cancer care. It is holistic because it is looking at the whole person. It is patient-centered care. It's not tumor-centered care. So I do obviously need to know what kind of cancer you have. I won't take a case until they've had their biopsies and know what we're dealing with. But it's not about the cancer. It's about the person that has cancer and how that cancer shows up for them in their life. And I will say it's sort of gratifying now in cancer care, because I'm not out there as a lone voice in the wilderness anymore. It used to be that I would talk about this thing about patient-centered care and customizing care to the individual, and that 10 women with breast cancer would get 10 different treatments. And now in mainstream cancer care, this is becoming the new way. The buzzwords now is targeted therapy. And the drugs are changing. So instead of this ghastly, toxic, one-size-fits-all, you have breast cancer, this is the cocktail that's approved, and that's what we're going to get. Now there's a much more nuanced approach to cancer, which is, okay, you have breast cancer, but how are your cells behaving? What genetic testing can we do to see how they might respond to different drugs or not? And therefore tailoring the treatments very explicitly. And a really clear example of this, how the herbs can weave in. There is very commonly now in breast cancer, there's a test that's done for a marker on the tissue called HER2/neu, or also known as epidermal growth factor 2. And it's a receptor site on the cell surface that is mutated in many breast cancer patients and overactive and receiving a message from the cell surface to tell the nucleus to replicate faster and make more cells, in other words, for cancer to grow. And there is a drug that's been approved for quite a few years, actually, Herceptin, that targets that specific receptor site and downregulates it. And so if you test positive, your biopsy material is tested, yes, you express that marker, you're a candidate for the drug Herceptin. And actually the drug works quite well, but it works even better in the presence of green tea, particularly the catechins from green tea. So the really interesting thing in herbal medicine today, and the rabbit holes that I get myself lost in around herbal medicine, is what are the tests that could be done on the genes or on the tissues that will indicate specific drugs, yes, but also indicate specific herbs. Most of our research is being done on isolates. So, for example, with green tea, the research is done on the EGCG, the epigallocatechin gallate. It's one thing in the green tea. So what I look at, and my holism approach to it, is, yes, there's fantastic research showing that isolated constituent in this receptor site and this drug environment, but what are we missing from the whole plant? So I will give the isolates because that's based on reliable research, but I will also give the whole herb. And so another example is, I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of Artemisia annua, or sweet Annie, annual wormwood, Chinese wormwood. It's a big buzz herb now in cancer care and in other diseases like even Lyme's, for example, and COVID, for example, have had some very good results using Artemisia annua. And there's one constituent in there called Artemisia Lin that everybody's all excited about. It's technically a sesquiterpene lactone, which is carried in the volatile oil. Whoopee, it's great, it works. But it works way better in the presence of the flavonoids that are not in the volatile oil, but in the rest of the leafy material. So yes, the isolate works fantastically, but it's amped up even more in the presence of the rest of the plant material. So in my practice, again, I use the isolated constituent in a measured amount of micrograms per, hourly dose, etc. But I also use the whole herb to try and get that holistic, rounded approach. Because actually, in an ideal world, I would have my patients go out in the fields and graze to get their medicines. Compliance might be poor. So we weave in the whole plant medicine into the whole person, not just their disease. So I definitely want to know what kind of cancer and even what type of breast cancer it is. But I'm also interested in, how do you get on with your kids? What's your spiritual practice? Obviously diet and exercise and lifestyle, but actually, do you even want to live? Why? What are you going to do with your life when you get your life back from cancer? What's that going to look like? So it's a really deep exploration of the person's intention to heal and to be well.
Just a quick break from the show to let you know about the HerbRally events page. Did you know that we add new herbalism events from all over the United States and the world, for that matter, on an almost daily basis? You can peruse herbalism events at herbrally.com/events and hopefully find something in your neck of the woods. You can also search by state to make it even easier to find a plant walk, conference, or class near you. And we also list virtual herbalism events as well. Check those out at herbrally.com/virtual. And again, for the in-person events, go to herbrally.com/events. All right, back to the show.
So in working with both the whole plant as well as the isolated constituent, are you then giving pills with the isolate and then tea or tincture for the whole plant material?
Yeah, to some extent that would be true. Green tea, for example, I'll give them the EGC in a capsule, and then I'll have them drink some green tea, but actually you'd have to pretty much be drowning in it to get a lot of therapeutic action from straight out green tea. But matcha becomes very useful because they can get a fairly high concentration that way. I do use some branded products. For example, the Artemisia has a measured amount of artemisinin and whole herb extract in the capsule. I use a lot of tinctures. I use quite a lot of capsule products. And every single patient in my practice gets a tea, custom blended, and they're loose plant tea. They're not tea bags. They're not commercial brands. They're customized, and they're intentionally whole herb. In fact, I'm growing most of the herbs I use in my tea blend. I grow myself. And this is very deliberate, because to me, that's one way of bringing in the horticulture therapy. So my patients know, first of all, that myself and my garden crew have actually grown that medicine for them. And there's a really interesting relationship there between the person and the plant and the people that grew the plants, and a different value system that comes with that. But I also want my patients to know that it is plant medicine. It is not pills and potions that does the work. That I want them to have an appreciation of the magic of the medicine, that actually flowers did this for them. And it's a different relationship than taking the same plant in an abstract form like a tincture or a pill, where they really, I mean, let's be honest, most of the tinctures taste great and the pills are just a brown powder. And there's no sort of philosophical change for the person. It's just this pill of herbs instead of that pill of drugs. But it doesn't change the way they relate to the medicine. So I'm pretty strict about everybody having a tea. They have to actively ask me not to give them a tea if they don't want it.
And I presume you have pretty good patient adherence with taking the teas because they want to get better.
I work hard to make them, first of all, beautiful to look at, as well as tasty. So it may not be necessarily indicated for somebody, but they'll often end up with something minty or something lemony. Because my practice is largely cancer focused. It's not only, I have a general practice, but it's probably 80 or 85% cancer care. Those patients are good candidates for the lemongrass and lemon verbena and citrus peels because of the limonene content. There's a monoterpene hydrocarbon called limonene, which is profoundly anti-cancer. And it's present in, again, lemongrass, lemon verbena, and citrus peels. And so I put those in my teas in a reasonable amount, yes, for medicine, but they also can mask a lot of other things. So I try to make the tea pleasant. And then I usually put some flowers in to make it beautiful. So there may be rose petals or hibiscus or, red clover. And again, I'm hand harvesting my own red clover blossoms. So they're very beautiful. And patients definitely respond visually to that.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like whenever I get someone coming in with a cancer diagnosis, it's still a really scary thing. And because it's complicated, and for normal person, when we hear the word cancer, there's some level of fear and confusion that arises. In hearing you speak about this consideration of beauty and aesthetics and flavor with considering the tea, I looked at your book, and there's a whole chapter about formulations, the chapter on herbal formulating for cancer care. And I would love to hear you speak a little bit about your considerations and formulations.
Yeah, it was a difficult chapter to write because I was trying to make it practical and applicable and not get too tangled up in the details that we can get lost in. So I also had to be very cognizant of who my audience would be, because my publisher was Story Books, and the majority of people that are purchasing storybooks, books from Story Publications, are not practitioners. So they publish people like Rosemary Gladstar and Stephen Buhner and Christopher Hobbs, who are writing fairly technical but not medical books. So I had to scale back some of the text to suit what they wanted from me to reach the widest audience. So what I have done in the book is I've given sort of principles and foundational concepts, and then gone on to illustrate that, if you like, through some case presentations. So there's cases in the book. In my clinical practice, I would have to say it's a little bit more complicated than put in the book. I try to make the book accessible information for people to get them up off the ground and doing the work, and then you refine and detail as you go. There is a chapter also in the book that goes through the different pathways of cancer cell physiology. What is actually happening in a cancer cell and how is it misbehaving? What are those pathways? And therefore, what agents can be brought in to address each individual pathway. And I'm currently working with a graphic designer to take the whole book and turn it into one diagram, which is going to be a very big diagram. It's going to be like a wall-sized poster. I'm actually going to have it printed up as a full-color poster, where it's a cell. It's essentially a diagram of a cell with all the different pathways drawn out and all the different herbs and natural agents that either activate or inhibit those pathways. So I've sort of renamed my work recently. I had this I'm not sure if it's a good idea or not. You might advise me this isn't a good idea, but I've sort of renamed the work I'm doing now as orthomolecular herbal medicine. So we know about orthomolecular nutrition, which is taking this particular form of B vitamin for this particular condition with this particular marker in the blood, and it's very targeted and very customized. And that's actually what I do with my herbs. I look for very particular things in blood work, which is not in the routine blood work. We do specialized blood testing, some of which I've described in the book, and we do specialized gene testing. And we try to establish the cellular behaviors of each individual patient and customize a treatment protocol to address their specific deficiencies or excesses or abnormalities of cell behavior using the isolate research in a holistic model. Oh gosh, it's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work with measurable, quantifiable data, because I've been in this for 35 years now, and I want my patients to have something tangible that they can go back to the doctor and say, see that test? That's what that marker was showing 6 months ago. Now look what's happened, and this is what I did to get there. And I ask all my patients to lodge their herbal prescriptions in their medical file with all their doctors. Because when they do well, I want the doctors to know the herbs were in the mix. And I think it's a respect thing. I want to know as a practitioner, as a professional, what drugs my patients are taking. And I want to be fully informed of what tests and results so that I can work with that information. And I feel that as a point of professional ethics, we should inform all the doctors what is going on in the natural medicine arena, even if they're not able to work with that information, at least they have the option to engage with it if they wish. So the formulating is very customized. We always start, as I describe in the book, with the foundation, which is not very specific. Foundation medicine is where all herbalists start in all diseases, in all patients. It's about, are you eating the right food for your constitution, for your disease, for your allergies? What is the right diet for you? How are you doing with stress and stress management? What's your sleep like? Is your immune system doing well? How is your detox pathways? What's your liver like? What's your kidney like? So it's just foundation. It's, like building solid ground to stand on so that everything that can be optimized in normal physiology of the body is working to its best. And then you come in and you start looking at all the comorbidities, the other diseases that the person has, what drugs are they on that might impact on the herbs you choose, what side effects do they have from their conventional treatments that you might need to address. And finally, you can work around to addressing the cancer. And that's where I think my book, the part I am most happy with, or if you like, proud about in the book, is the part where we go into all the cytotoxic herbs and the herbs that are actually not written up in most contemporary herb books. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of good books out there about how to build a foundation. There's a lot of decent books out there about how to manage side effects and support the comorbidities and what have you. But there's very little information about how to treat cancer, how to kill a cancer cell with herbs. So it's like herbal chemotherapy, if you want to be reductionist about it. And that was the hardest part to write. It took a very long time because I had all kinds of isolate research from contemporary studies in animals or test tubes, in very inappropriate, cruel research in animals. But there was nothing in humans. There was so few studies in humans altogether, and certainly not of whole herb. So I ended up going back in time, really back to the eclectics, back to the late 1800s, to get some of that information, the dosing. So, for example, mayapple, Podophyllum peltatum. There's tons of research in modern times about the drugs, etoposide and teniposide, that are chemotherapy drugs made from the plant. That's great. But there's a 100-year gap back in time before you get to the eclectics who talk about using the whole plant extract and giving doses for the whole plant extract. And there was nothing in 100 years in between. And so that was very challenging. And I'd love to give a shout out, if I could, to my expert reader, who is very humble, but oh my gosh, he saved my life many times here with this book. Eric Yarnell, Dr. Eric Yarnell from Heron Botanicals. And Eric was incredibly gracious to take on to be my expert reader. And it wasn't an easy job because the book is quite dense and quite complicated. And Eric was quite brutal a few times. He actually wrote me one time, he said, this is, hope I can say it out loud here, this is crap, capital letters crap. You don't know what you're talking about. And I wrote back and I said, thank you, Eric. That's why I asked you to do the expert reading, because you know this and you're willing to call me out when I have gone wrong. And that's what we all need, because none of us have all the answers. And Eric was so helpful to me to get me back on track when I'd gone down a rabbit hole and lost the way. And because it was not easy to find a lot of the information. So what I would say to our audience is, wherever you are in your herbal journey or in your cancer journey, there is a place for herbal medicine that you can apply. You can always do foundation work. Everybody foundation work. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, liver, kidney, immune. Like, that's the basis. And everybody needs it. And every herbalist can do that. And every patient can do that for themselves. And then the clinical herbalist is going to go on and start looking at helping you manage, you're in chemo. What do you do about mouth sores? What do you do when your fingernails fall out? What do you do about the diarrhea? There's definitely herbs that help all of those things. You're going to have surgery. How do we optimize your healing? So that's sort of the synergistic aspect of the protocols. And then some medical herbalists may want to go on and start to do attacking the cancer cells, using changing cell behaviors. And it's much more specialized. And that's where people get scared, because anybody, again, can do foundation work. Anybody who's trained can do symptom management. But where we get afraid as professionals is stepping out into treating cancer. And I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that herbal medicine will cure cancer. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about collaboration with other health professionals from many different disciplines, including oncologists and radiologists and drug specialists and all these people, to find a pathway through that works for this patient under these circumstances. And that's where the collaboration piece comes in. So a really competent herbalist will recognize their own limitations, know their own scope of practice, know where they have a lot to offer, and where they need to step out and not interfere. And that is really the tricky part of work. But I'm here to tell you all, everyone who's listening, that you shouldn't be afraid of getting in there because, well, first of all, 40% of us are going to have a cancer diagnosis in our lifetime. That means a lot of your patients will have that diagnosis, whether they come to you for the care or not. They may be under oncology care and coming to you for something else, but you're still going to get engaged. 40% on average of all of us are going to get cancer at some point. So being afraid of it to the point that we don't engage with it is actually not. The other thing I would like to say is that there's little to nothing that a herbalist could do that could be any worse than what the chemotherapy is. So put it in context. I'm thinking of a number of patients as I'm speaking here. I've got a patient in the UK right now who's very deeply into an ovarian cancer story. She's also got diabetes and her list of pathologies is just actually quite extraordinary, even before you talk about cancer. And she's in an experimental clinical trial protocol where she doesn't even know the name of the drug she's taking because it just has a number at this point. It doesn't even have a name. It's so new. So can I work there? What am I doing? So I find out what I can from her oncologist about the drug. I got the backstory on this experimental new drug. I look at the pathways that drug is targeting, and here's the orthomolecular herbal piece. I look at specifically the enzymes that the drug is going into, and I find the research that tells me the isolate herb constituent that goes in that enzyme, and I give the whole herb that has that constituent in. So I'm amplifying the drug therapy. And what I can say for her is right now, she's doing a lot better than most of the other people in the trial. So her doctors have said, wow, we don't really know, given all your other comorbidities that should be holding you back, why your cancer has actually gone into abeyance. It's not gone, it's just kind of stalled right now. But whatever it is you're doing, we want you to keep going because something is working. Don't change anything. In other words, they're giving her permission continue with her herbs because they're quite intrigued by how well she. So I think that a lot of our fear is, first of all, it's very self-limiting as a clinician. It doesn't help the patient in the long run. And it's actually misplaced a lot of the time. We have a lot more opportunities to work in this field than perhaps people realize. And I do absolutely do research into if we know which pathways your drug is clearing through, then like in the liver, are you going through this cytochrome pathway or that cytochrome pathway? I will then cross-reference that with my herbs to make sure I'm not going to induce or inhibit clearance pathways. But let's be honest, they know that about most drugs, but certainly not all. They know that about a few herbs and very few foods. So yes, we know that grapefruit juice will inhibit cytochrome P453A4. And if you're taking drugs that clear through that pathway and it's inhibited by grapefruit juice, then you're over-medicated. Okay, we know that. But what about apple juice, pineapple juice, tomato juice, orange juice? What about a mix of juices? What about all the other foods you eat? So at the end of the day, the unknown is greater than the known, and you're not being told not to eat anything. So what I always say is, with your herbs, you start low and go slow, and you monitor really closely. And that keeps us out of trouble most of the time. That's really all.
So with doing so much extensive research, usually with a new client, like how do you factor that time into your schedule when working with people?
That's a great question. I have first of all, I've brought in an associate recently into my practice because I have some philosophical, personal, ethical challenge with being expensive and elitist. So I've brought in an associate who's now running a sliding scale clinic and then running the files through me. So we do file review twice a week to make sure she's giving the care she needs to, but it's not costing the patient as much. So for me personally, I spend about anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes previewing a file before I see a patient. So they have to submit all their medical records in chronological order. I graph all the blood work so that I can see it changing over time. And I'm not flipping pages trying to say, oh, I'm sure you had that test somewhere. When was it? What was it? I have it all on one page graphed, and that takes time. Then I do a 90-minute interview. And then I spend anywhere from, if I'm really lucky, it might be an hour. It's often 2 to 3 hours of my own time. Working up a file. So I take a maximum of 4 new patients a month, which is very unfortunate because I'm currently booking out to November, which is just not acceptable if you've got a new cancer diagnosis. So again, with my associate now, she started to do some of the intake interviews, gather data, so that then we can together review that and come up with treatment plans so we can move through faster. I just don't have the bandwidth to do that many more patients, but they need it. So I'm trying to find a way to make it A, more affordable for people, and B, more being able to get through more patients in a timely manner and still have a personal life of my own. Because really my passion is to be in the garden. That's where I want to be. And so bringing in an associate is also, for me, a big step toward myself, the opportunity to get out of the garden. I haven't got there yet. I get 1 day a week scheduled in my garden, and it's a work day with a crew. I had 14 people yesterday, so because I have a lot of volunteers. And so I'm not really gardening. I'm actually doing crowd control in the garden, telling them what weeds to pull and what tools to use. And so, yeah, it's challenging because, and I know Donnie Yance has the same issue. He's brought in associates as well, because when you get a reputation for the detailed kind of work that we do, patients want it. I had an email yesterday from a patient who had heard me on a podcast recently, Dr. Nalini Chilkov out of LA. And Nalini is a Chinese medicine doctor specializing in cancer care. And we're old friends. And she had me on her podcast. And a patient wrote to both of us to say that this month is her 21-year anniversary of her diagnosis. And that Nalini, Dr. Chilkov, and I were integral to her survival. And, you know, that's what we want to be able to do. We want to have people come back 20 years later and say, hey, I'm fine, I'm well. It's incredibly rewarding when that happens, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, absolutely. For preparing to chat with you, I asked a few other people for questions. So I've got some questions from other herbalists. Camille Freeman asks, I would love to hear more about the emotional side of being a practitioner who provides cancer care. I'm sure there's many happy moments, and also it seems like there might be lots of hard times as well. How do you manage the heaviness, sadness, or other complex emotions that may arise either during consults or in general?
Such a great question. And thank you, Camille, for bringing that up. I know Camille is teaching a lot right now on how to get started in herbal medicine, how to, like your first year as a practitioner. And so this is very, very pertinent to her work at the moment. It's pertinent to all of our work. I would have to say for myself, there's a number of pieces in that puzzle. First of all, I have had, since I was 18, a very, very focused meditation practice. I've been a disciple of Osho gradually since I was 18, and I still implement his meditation practice. That keeps me grounded. I also grew up on a farm where we butchered our own animals. And I watched my father weeping every year. It was always done in the fall because that's the traditional time. And my father would weep as he killed the animals. And we ate every dinner. We were a very meat-focused family because we were butchering. I've been vegetarian myself since I was 18 now. But as a child, we would have every night, we would name the animal that we were eating. And we would give thanks. My parents would say, do you remember this was Petals? We had a lovely breeding cow called Petal. And this was Petal's calf last year. And do you remember when he escaped from the field and ran in the trees? You know, we'd tell stories about the animal on our plate. So there was no mystery about life and death. It's a really interesting question. How do you separate yourself from the process and still maintain your compassion? And I think that for me, a lot of it is my meditation practice, being able to be what my teacher used to say, what Osho used to say. He was a master, an enlightened master from India. He came to America. It was super controversial. Lots of people would be like, oh my God, she's a disciple of that guy. But, you know, the teachings need to be separated from the nonsense that goes around the teacher. And we could say that about most religions, I think. So the teachings that I received was a great deal about, I don't actually talk about this very often because a lot of people have a lot of judgments, but here we go. I'm in it now. The teachings that I received was a great deal about how to maintain what he used to call how to practice meditation in the marketplace. He used to tell us about how easy it is to go to the cave in the Himalayas and sit there in contemplation and have the villagers bring you food and spend 30 years in meditation practice in isolation. But how difficult it is to keep that conscious awareness of being in this moment here and now while the world is spinning all around you. So he literally talked about meditation in the moment. And it's really about finding that still quiet place inside and having that as the ground zero. So no matter what goes on around you, you're okay. And I would have to say that has been really rock solid for me. I've just gone through this week one of the most stressful things I've ever experienced in my entire life. My husband got lost on the mountain this week and was he's in his late 70s, a lot older than me. We had an amazing hike. We've done the hike before. He wandered off the trail and he was missing for over 24 hours. And when I say in the mountains, I mean cougar, bear, huge glacier. Like we have real country out here, big country. And we had search and rescue, the helicopters, the dogs. He was found. He was airlifted out with a helicopter winch off to the hospital. He's home. He's okay. He's shaken up. He will be okay. He's not quite okay yet, but he will be. But all around me, all the people around me were, I think, in some ways struggling more than me. They were very stressed and very distressed. But for me personally, everybody kept coming, are you okay? What can we do to help? How can we support you? I'm like, I'm actually okay, because whatever happens will happen. And there's only so much I can do. So it was a very interesting experience for me to actually feel pretty strong about, I'm not saying I wasn't concerned. He was missing for over 24 hours in backcountry, big country with bear and cougar and cold nights and t-shirt and shorts. And, it was not a good story at all. But I would say that my meditation practice was brought out in that moment. I was able to drop back into that strong place inside and say, there's not anything I can do. Freaking out isn't going to help. Panicking, crying, it's not going to change anything. So why do that? Why go there? It's okay. It will be what it will be. And I bring that into my daily work as well. I absolutely have patients pass away. I absolutely counsel end of life. In Canada, such an enlightened country. By the way, the entire rescue program, there were 3 helicopters involved. There were nearly 40 people searching on the mountain. There were dogs. There was 8 hours in the emergency hospital. There's no bill at the end of that in Canada. So we have amongst many other enlightened things of Canada, we have medical assistance in dying. So you can choose your time and you don't choose your means because it's a medical process, but you can choose where you are when you die. You can choose who is with you, what music is playing, everything. You can set your space up where you want it, and you can choose when it's going to happen. So I've absolutely had patients who plan death and write me letters thanking me for helping them to get to this point where they can go in peace. We also have medical psilocybin for end of life, to help you not to leave, but to adjust to the process of leaving, to get clear about when you want to go and how you want to go. And I've absolutely prescribed that. I don't provide it. It's a medical process. You get it with a team of people that creates the right setting. But what I'm really trying to say here is that death is not a stranger for any of us. I think, wasn't it Benjamin Franklin who said the only 2 certainties is death and taxes? And not everyone pays their tax, but we are all going to leave. And every one of us has lost somebody. And so why be afraid of that? Why spend your life in fear of the inevitable? So it's really about carpe diem, seize the day, make the most of what you have. And when it's not good anymore and you want to go with grace, go with peace. If you go out fighting, it's harder for you, it's harder for everybody. So I do a lot of end-of-life counseling for people. I do a lot of work with bereavement, your own passing and the family that are being left behind, and helping them to come to terms with it. I would also say that I prescribe a remarkable amount of rose in my practice, because rose is the herb for heartache and heartbreak and heart-to-heart communication and heartfulness. Rose is the herb of the heart in the emotional sense. And so I use rose in many of my formulas, in my teas. I grow my own roses and harvest my own roses for the teas. I prescribe people to have, to purchase roses, to wear pink, to have rose-scented products, to just bring rose into their life in every way that they can. And with horticulture therapy, I ask people to grow roses. And if they don't have access to a garden, they can grow a miniature rose in a pot on a windowsill. And that's part of the therapy work, is to watch the buds opening and to hang in there long enough to see the flowers forming. And so there's a whole psychology about hope and new beginnings when the flowers are just opening. And so there's a whole conversation that can open for us about the cycle of life and death and rebirth and living and dying again. And what does that mean? And so I use horticulture therapy in some perhaps unusual ways. Most horticulture therapy is done with people with a disability out in the garden, getting some, if you like, occupational therapy approach to it, building some, muscle strength or coordination or things like that, or actually for psychological benefits. But I'm often using it for end-of-life work. And so how do I keep myself sane? I garden, I grow roses, and I have cultivated a practice of not being afraid of death. It's a deliberate exercise to face it and embrace it and honor it and not try to deny it.
Mm.
I'm not sure if that was helpful. You got me off on a bunch of tangents there.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I love the piece about the rose. And I'm noticing that we're getting close to time and wondering if you have time for 2 more questions.
Absolutely.
Okay. So so many questions. So I'll just read the 2 from Camille. So one is a follow-up from that last question around what herbal allies do you like working with yourself, and you already named Rose, to navigate personal emotions that may arise in working as a healthcare provider within the realm of integrative oncology. And the other question from Camille is, what recommendations do you have for newer clinicians who are interested in oncology to get training and education to provide great care for folks who are undergoing cancer treatment and or cancer survivors?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first question, I can just say Rose is probably my number one. Personal care herb, and absolutely safe for absolutely everybody. I've never met someone who didn't love Rose. So that's a real, really reliable remedy there. The second question, it's a big question because everybody's going to come at cancer care with their own filters of their own style of herbalism and their own prior education. Obviously, I could say read my book. It's a good primer. There is a series that I have just completed with the Shift Network on cancer care, holistic cancer care. And we went through the first 7 chapters of the book in a series of 7 classes. So there was a whole set of PowerPoint slides and explanations of the content of the book that's available. It's what the Shift Network calls an evergreen course. So people continue to sign up for that indefinitely. And I'm not here to promote my own work particularly. I'm here to talk to you about herbal medicine and cancer in general, but you asked the question, so a specific answer. I will be running an advanced program in holistic cancer care in the new year as an online. It will be in person actually in Canada, but for people who can't come in person, it will be also live streamed out online. Looking probably January, February to start, and it's going to be 5 or 6 days over a month or so, not in one chunk, but probably in 2 chunks. And it will be advanced cancer care for practitioners, not for beginners. So for the more entry level, the more self-care or newer practitioners, I would say my program through the Shift Network is probably very accessible to people and a really good primer, a really good starting point. And then if people are more advanced practitioners or want to take it further, then I will be offering an advanced series in the new year. And people can just reach out to me directly through my website to find out more information.
Cool. And last question from our friend over at HerbRally, Mason Hutchinson. He says, "Hi, Chanchal. I listened to your interview on the Herbs with Rosalie podcast and heard you say, I see herbalism as an extremely effective form of activism. And I was hoping you could expound upon that further. In your opinion, how is herbalism a form of activism?"
Wow, thank you, Mason, for bringing that one out. Yeah, I started out very, very active in the Green Party and in the UK back in the 70s in the campaign for nuclear disarmament, tried to get American nuclear bombs off British soil, which we were successful in doing. And so now as a herbalist, what I see is that part of our job as herbalists, and this is why everybody gets a tea in my practice, it's giving herbal teas to me is a form of activism, because what I'm trying to do is get people to understand that it is indeed plant medicine that's making the difference. It's not a pill, a potion, an extract isolate. It is plants. And many, many people are what we call plant blind. They don't notice nature. They're in a little tin can on wheels, bombing down a freeway, and they don't notice it's just a green blur. They have no relationship to the natural world. So providing herbal teas, making them look at flowers and leaves and roots and barks and tasting them, and maybe even inviting them to grow one of those plants, even just on a balcony to look at, never mind to harvest, maybe coming to the gardens to harvest their own medicines. What I'm working with there is getting people to notice nature, to be aware of plants in every way, not just as medicines, and therefore, I hope, to have a greater appreciation of the natural world, and therefore start to make other choices about eating organic food, about protesting the cutting of the old growth forests, about being more engaged with green politics. So it's my entry point to awakening people to the need to save the planet.
One tea at a time, one gorgeous tea at a time.
Exactly. Yeah.
One gorgeous, delicious tea at a time. Chanchal, thank you so much. You inspire me so much. And honestly, I was a little bit starstruck in preparing to speak with you. And thanks for bringing yourself here and sharing this book with the world and sharing with us here on this podcast. Anything else that you wish to share with our listeners before we sign off for today?
Just really keep at it. Herbal medicine works. It's amazing stuff. And plants will save the planet. Long after we're gone, the plants will still be here. And I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. You certainly drew things out of me today that I hadn't expected to be sharing with the world, but that's okay. I'm a pretty open book for the most part. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. And I hope it was useful and informative. And more than that, I hope it was a little inspiring to people to just get out there and do the work. Don't be afraid of herbs. Don't be afraid of cancer. It's just a part of living and dying. And we absolutely have things that we can do to help those people, whatever the outcome. Death is not a failure. It is not a failure of herbal medicine. It's not a failure of the practitioner. It is sometimes just the way it's going to be, but you can still have people die better and have a better process, a better experience of getting there. That is a success and that is useful. So I would just say, get out there and do it and believe in the herbs.
Believe in the herbs. Thank you so much. And folks can find you at chanchalcabrera.com. Are you on social media anywhere?
Well, apparently I am. I don't do the social media myself, but my wonderful tech support person tells me that I've got quite a following on Instagram and Facebook. I'm actually dip in and out of Facebook sometimes, but I am on Instagram. I have some things up on YouTube. But if you come onto my Facebook page, which is just my name, then I think all the links are out from there. I'm very, very non-techie. I choose not to have a cell phone in my life. And so I've never actually, can I even say this? I've never been on Instagram, but apparently I have a presence there and people can find me there. I suppose you'd look for my name.
Okay, great. So chanchalcabrera.com on Facebook and Instagram, same thing. It's chanchal.cabrera. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And thank you again, Chanchal. Until next time, happy herbal adventures. Cheers.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the HerbRally Podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at HerbRally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from HerbRally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.